I live in Jerusalem. I mean, I speak Hebrew. Oh my God. I feel the spiritual aspect or the spiritual aura of the city. I don't believe in God. Not now. Maybe I'll believe, in a few years' time.
Hi everybody, welcome to Really Jewish, our conversation about what it is to be a really Jewish. I'm back with Yair Aldan. If you are back for another listen, welcome back. If you're here for the first time, Bruchim Habaim, welcome. We're really happy to have you. This is a podcast where we dig a bit deeper into some of the big issues affecting Jewish life and the Jewish community. I'm here with my partner in crime, Yair Aldan. Last week we had a guest, Rabbi Joel Levy. Next week we have another guest, Rabbi Josh Wiener. We're alternating 1 week in, 1 week out with a guest, and 1 week in with a conversation with Yair. Welcome back, Yair.
Hey, Oliver, how are you? You had a big demonstration of the Jewish community in London because of the last events. What's going on there?
Well, it's been a big week. It's a lot going on, and it's with a heavy heart to continue to talk about antisemitism. I feel like it is a significant issue in the UK, certainly in Europe. At the same time, I guess part of what we're trying to do in Really Jewish is also to steer to the topics where Jews want to be talking about, things that actually relate to who we are as Jewish community and that should shape and define us. Whereas I think some of the conversation about antisemitism is not how I want my life to be shaped or defined. Well, maybe we'll come back to that as we go, because,
The podcast actually is escapism for you. Wonderful.
yeah, of course. No, a part of the project
Right.
that we're doing is the desire. I think a lot of rabbis, a lot of community leaders, a lot of people who work in the Jewish community spend their whole life talking about Israel and anti-Semitism. There's no escaping the crucial nature of both of those two parts. But it's also really important to provide a voice of actually the deepening and a focus on what our Judaism actually is, historically, linguistically, Torahitically. That's a part of the really Jewish story.
And I also think talking about Judaism and escapism, in a way, Talmud Torah for me, not always, but a lot of time was kind of creating a world within a world. And I think the rabbis did that in a way. And we repeat it when we learn the text and we talk about the text and we talk about our Judaism. And it's wonderful in a way. You can disconnect yourself from the outside and just dwell into identity and words and norms. And I think it's one of the wonderful qualities of Talmud Torah.
Yeah, I think ultimately you come out stronger. That's part of the story. You come out with some kind of shield, with more resilience and more capacity to deal with the world outside, if you permit for that aspect of deepening, which hopefully we're going to do today. So today, the topic that we chose was about Judaism of place or time. And a couple of words of introduction. We spoke to Reb Tamar Elad Applebaum a couple of weeks ago on Yom Ha'atzmaut, on Israel Independence Day. And we focused on Jerusalem because she's also a Jerusalemite, as Yair is. And we're not going back exactly the same place, but it's Yom Yerushalayim on Friday. We're recording now Wednesday the 13th, and on Friday it will be the Jerusalem Day, which marked depends how you frame it, the reunification or the conquering of Jerusalem by the Israeli army, which took into military occupation the West Bank and Gaza in the same war in 1967, which is part of the timeline of history that takes us to where we are today. Such a complicated story messy story. But the bit that's interesting in terms of faith is Jerusalem. The reason for the retaking of Jerusalem and the reason why, and the Israeli narrative, we call it the reunification of the eastern and western parts of Jerusalem, is because there has been a yearning for more than 2,000 years towards this place. The first temple built by Solomon, the second temple in the time of kind of just as the year 70 approached, was destroyed. we have this historic, linguistic, fabled connection to this place. And one of the questions the question we're asking today is whether place or time is important, whether we sanctify the place that we call Jerusalem, or we sanctify the place that we call the kind of the festivals and the Shabbat and the things that Jews do place. So that's the kind of that's the conversation we're starting on today. Give us a couple of words of introduction, Yair.
Listen, I mean, obviously, we're talking about a scale, right? We feel time, we sanctify time, we differentiate times from other times, and obviously, we also give a lot of attention to the place, and we feel part of the place. And you and I, even when I look at you, Oliver, I can see that you're English. I mean, it's not even before you talk. I mean, and I also, I understand. I was not born in Israel, but I came here very little. But I'm Israeli in every sense. So I'm talking about the scale, and obviously I'm interested in where am I on scale? Where are you in this scale between time and place? But also I want to just map the problem and differentiate what we're talking about from the bigger issue. The bigger issue is, you know, the connection between the Jewish people and the land of Israel, which is lots of been written about the problematic connection that we have to this land, right? On the one hand, we're supposed to come here, it's a promised land and everything, etc., etc. On the other, if we were not, A.B. Joshua, wrote about it a lot. If we're not keeping up with the mitzvot, the rules God gave us, he will actually throw us out of this land. So we have this very, in a way, Freudian connection to this place. But I'm not talking about this problematic issue, which is a problem. I want to say something about it, but let's leave it for now. I'm talking about the Jerusalem as a place within the place. And as a Jerusalemite, I have to say, obviously, I'm just putting it off the table, right? I hate Yom Yerushalayim. I don't consider it as a happy moment. I feel it's a charade of shame, of racism, and I feel just awkward just to talk about it. Having said that, I just disclaimer, I'm a proud Jew, a proud Zionist, and obviously, I mean, there is something about Yom Yerushalayim, how it became that people are taking it to places that for me are just shameful. I wouldn't say not Jewish because it's for them, it's their Jewishness that makes them, scroll in the streets of Jerusalem, ancient, and give and just be. I mean, express their fascism in a way. I mean, I'm disconnected from that. But I'm talking about. I mean, I just want to finish one idea. I have this complex feeling about Jerusalem, which is, on the one hand, it's my city, and I have this everyday life in this very regular city when you talk about, I mean, when you think about it. But on the other hand, as a secular person, I feel the spiritual aspect or the spiritual aura of the city. And so I'm walking on the streets, in the streets of Jerusalem, with this complex feeling that is, makes me in a way feel that it shouldn't and can't be connected to a certain people or a certain nationality. There is something very universal about this city.
There's so many different parts. I think I have a very intimate relationship with Jerusalem. Talking about the unification of East and West, when my first apartment in Jerusalem was Rehov Nevi'im, and then we got closer to East Jerusalem. We lived on Musrara, which is the old neighborhood of Musrara, which was the houses on the other side of the street to where I lived, with the Israeli-Jordanian front line between East and West. Between 1948, the creation of the State of Israel, and 1967, when Israel retook East Jerusalem, that was a front line with barbed wire and soldiers and fire being fire going from one side to the other every now and again with flare-ups, and the historic community that lived there. It was a historically like impoverished neighborhood, and also the home of the Israeli Black Panthers, which was the kind of Tunisian, Moroccan, I think Yemeni pushback against the kind of Ashkenazi Eastern European control of all things Israeli and all things political. My association with Jerusalem is very visceral. My association with Jerusalem is walking the streets of the old city, walking the streets of West Jerusalem, walking the streets, seeing that visceral relationship between Jews, but also people of all faiths and none. Like also the kind of aspect of pilgrimage of like people coming to Jerusalem just to see this kind of vantage point on and faith conviction and faith connection. But I also relate, I teach this class, one plug, Tuesday nights, PM UK, PM Central European time, on Zoom. Everybody's welcome to come. And yesterday we were talking about this topic because I often link the two classes about place or time. Another aspect, when you start to kind of dig deeper into this question, is that Jews have found loads of different places to be holy. Jerusalem is the historic, like multi-layered place of valence and connection that Jews have basically had since the beginning of Judaism itself, that there'll be Hamakom Asher Yivchar, this place that will be chosen for holy convocation, holy connection, holy pilgrimage inside the Jewish tradition. But they've also done some of that, different pieces of that, in Babylonia, in modern-day Iraq, in Poland. One of the Midrashim says, Polin, here we dwelt for almost 1,000 years of Jewish history, in Morocco and Tunisia, in different core and key Jewish centers, which have also held aspects of sanctity, and even to this day, still are places of pilgrimage. I think of places in Ukraine and parts of Russia where, Hasidic families still go on pilgrimage to visit the graves of the Rebbe. Like we have that in many of the different places where Jews have lived. So even in the context of place in Judaism, if we start to break it down, there's more multivalence than there is valence. There's all kind of more difference than there is kind of unity. And I can't for a second escape the unity of Jerusalem. We call Yekirtei Aretz, like this place of center. Yeah, I said in the class yesterday, even on generation where no person in your family, community, or even the community of your community would necessarily have ever touched foot in the land of Israel, let alone Jerusalem. Even then, in the kind of, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 500 years ago, people were still praying towards Jerusalem. It was still a center. It was still a focal point. Every day, religious Jews waking up in the morning 3 times a day praying to Jerusalem. So it's both. It's one place of many in Jewish life, but then it's, for more than 2,000 years, also the place of Jews coming together, even in a time when we weren't actually physically in the city.
I mean, first of all, I have a problem with all this pilgrimage towards graves of a very, it's Sadiq or Hasid or everything. I don't have initially I didn't have a problem with it. Everybody can find this spiritual place and try to give meaning to some reality in his life. And I don't judge. I didn't. But when I see what's going on today, where people actually lose it and actually feel that the place can actually generate something, and they kind of mix between, and they're confused between the process and the ontology. I mean, they actually believe that there is some kind of power to around these places, and you see it in hundreds of thousands. I mean, I'm just traumatized, really. I mean, by what happened in Meron a few weeks ago, where thousands of people actually disobeyed the instruction of the police in Israel just because they want to be at the Hilulah of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, which is, for me, it's losing sight of what's the right priority in your life. But
You have to give a little bit of context. So Meron is considered to be the historic grave of Shimon Bar Yochai. Shimon Bar Yochai is the fabled author of the Zohar. And there's a very cool story that we also looked at last night of him in the cave, where he's kind of a hermit for 12 years and then one more year, 13th year. And the historic Lag BaOmer pilgrimage, which is the break in the counting of the Omer on the 33rd day of 49, is that many Hasidim of particular Kabbalistic Eastern European Hasidic Jewish sects go there to travel, and particularly it's a place of bonfires, and it's also a place where lots of kids have their hair cut for the first time at the age of 3. Another kind of piece of context is interesting because there was a great tragedy there maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago, more.
More. I
In
would
the
say
last,
6
in the
or 7.
6 or 7 years where, 6 or 7 years where there was basically some kind of stampede, a kind of people crush because of the sheer volume of people there. And related to the war in the north of Israel with Hezbollah, and in related also, I think, in part to not wanting any kind of repeat of the tragedy of Meron 6 or 7 years ago, there was a ban on people traveling there. So, but interesting to note that even in Israel, we still have lots of other pilgrimage sites and places of significance and holiness and importance, even outside of Jerusalem.
But
Just
if
a note.
Yeah, I mean, if you're asking me about, how I see the connection between Judaism and being in your place, in your home, in your house, I would say if there is something like that, right? I would say Judaism recommends you to be in the place you live in, to actually be, not just to live in, to be there. But at the same time, it recommends you not to feel too much at home. I would say that. How do I know that? Because I know there are specific mitzvot and rules that gives you undermine your sense of home. Like Sukkot, where you go out of your house for a week. Like Shemitah, where you were not allowed to actually cultivate the land for 1 year, and accepting that it's not yours in a way, it's God's. It's there's something very social about it, and also Shabbat in a way, right? Shabbat in a way where you close your house, which is very important. אתה ובנך וביתך עבדך ואמתך ובהמתך וגרך אשר בשעריך. It's a description of a farm. You close the farm on Shabbat. You're not doing anything, but at the same time, when you're not doing anything, there is something spiritual about it, right? It's not only the place, it's something about elevating yourself from the elements, the very basic elements, very fundamental, materialistic elements of life. And in Jerusalem, if I come back, I will just say there is something even more spiritual about it. It's not as Tel Aviv, it's not as Beersheba, which is a very ancient city as well. There is something about Jerusalem that is universal, that is not connected to everything I said before. And I say it as a secular, which is crazy. My daughter, Oliver, she came to me. Obviously, they talk about Yom Yerushalayim at kindergarten, but we are a very secular house. We're talking about God. I talk about God with the kids, but they know I don't believe in God. Not now. Maybe I'll believe, in a few years' time. But she asked me to go to the Western Wall, to go to the Kotel. And she knows I don't believe in God. But there is something about, there's attraction. There is an attraction. Rudolf Otto says the ambivalence of the sacred. It attracts you. It could, Rudolf Otto said this attraction, can get you terrified, anxious, but it can only also get you passionate. Love, the mercy comes out of you. So it could take you to both places, and I feel Jerusalem has this potential, of the sacred, even for secular people. That's what I'm saying.
On the 100th episode of Really Jewish, Yair is going to come out as a God believer. That's what we're building up to.
You see it with feeling now.
I'm just working on you. Okay, I'm just working on God. Yair's God connection. Yair, take us to we now did a slip there because you mentioned Shabbat, and you mention the aspect of time and the possibility of removing yourself a place from place into a place of time where time becomes sanctified. But take us a little bit into the to one of the texts that you prepared, and and then let's carry on that conversation. If place is indeed important, and how we sanctify both time and place in the Jewish tradition.
Listen, one of the things that astonished me when I read the Deuteronomy at the first time, and still is the fact that everybody is aware of that. Every commentary from 1,000 years ago, pays attention to that. The fact, even 2,000 years ago, the fact that God doesn't, in Deuteronomy, doesn't say anything about the place where the temple should have be built, and you said it before, the place that God will choose in the future, right? And I thought to myself, from when do you know an issue is a big issue? When you see that every commentary is different and comes from its own worldview. That's when you know that there is something very important about this, about this obscure verse. And you can see, Oliver, you can see that the traditional commentary goes to, yeah, why didn't God specify where the temple should be lived? It should be constructed because he wanted to avoid disagreement between the people of Israel about where would the temple be built, right? That's one commentary. Or to prevent, destruction of the place by non-Jews. Obviously, this commentary comes from, a worldview that non-Jews are always trying to sabotage the spiritual life of Jews, or this concealment of the place as a possibility of being discovered by God in the generation that is actually apt for it. Or it's a process, traditional commentary. The process, I think it's Nechama Leibovich. It's a process that you should actually pass. You should go through in order to reveal the place by the people of Israel, also not only by God. It's a combined project. And obviously, from my liberal secular worldview, as I read it as a warning in a way, as saying, listen, this is the place is not the main thing, right? When you sanctify the place, you are in danger of, like you said about the graves, you are in danger in making it the thing itself, but it's not. The place is only the shell of the content, of the spiritual content. um Obviously, as an Israeli, I am not, you won't, I won't say that the place is not important. It's important to be in your place. But when God refers to the temple, God understands that the temple, not your home, the temple it could be dangerous to actually make the place itself a thing, right? To specify a place. And I think it's a warning. And it's also not only a warning, for me, it's also, like a challenge to take. God says to you, you have to take responsibility. The place is connected to sovereignty. It doesn't specify it because it says, we're talking about the concept. We're talking about the concept of place. When you have a place, you have to take responsibility over it. And I see it so many times in my city. That's crazy. I see it that the religious people, trying not to generalize, but the religious people who are kind of interested in spirituality, they refer to the place as they neglect it. They don't. They're the owners of the street in a way, and that's why they allow themselves to litter, for example. What kind of a person who feels comfortable to litter? A person that doesn't feel that the street is its own in a way. And in a way, it's crazy. Religious people, maybe it's normal when you think about it, because they are so spiritual, they neglect the aspect of what it means to be in a place. I don't know. So you have a very complex situation.
Listen, there's some interesting parts which are raised here. So the Deuteronomy text that you bring classically doesn't refer to Jerusalem, and if you take the 5 books of Moses, there's no reference to Jerusalem. Only in later writings of the prophets do we learn of the place of Jerusalem. But we should say that the layered tradition, specifically in relation, the two that I was thinking about, was the place that Abraham sacrifices his son Isaac. The Akedat Yitzchak. That's supposed to be on Har HaMoriah. Where is Har HaMoriah? Har HaMoriah is Jerusalem. The place that Abraham is most tested, the 10th test of 10, he's told to sacrifice his most beloved son. And that happens in Jerusalem. And then Jacob's ladder, the image, the Kabbalistic and Hasidish and Torah image of the Jacob's ladder, which is the ladder which is Mutzav Arza, staked in the floor, and Ole Shamaima goes up to the heavens, which is, in the mystical tradition, and in many ways in the core tradition of Jewish life, is a kind of staple image of the possibility of spiritual elevation inside our Jewish tradition, also happens in Jerusalem, Har HaMoriah. There's a kind of the layering. So you're right to notice that in Deuteronomy, there's no mention of Jerusalem, but Hamakom Asher Yivcha, the place that I will show you, or the place that I will choose, is the language of description of the holy place that will become the holy place. But in the layered Jewish tradition, like a kind of layered cake, you have my kids are often obsessing about rainbow cake in one of the books that they read. The cherry layer and the strawberry layer and the chocolate layer and the layered tradition of Jewish life. Jerusalem is certainly richly mentioned, but also you observe that this is that within the commentary, when you find such diversity in the commentary in response to this phrase of Hamakom Asher Yivcha, the place that I will choose, it's an expression of anxiety, an expression of an uncertain link to the possibility of Jerusalem that's at the very epicenter of the tradition. The place I wanted to go from there is what Jews have done with that. Not only have Jews had this in their discussion for several thousand years, but we're also approaching Shavuot. This is now kind of 10 days before Shavuot, and Shavuot is one of the harvest festivals, HaRegalim. Why is it called Regalim? Because the people literally went up with their feet to Jerusalem to offer sacrifice. And there's also something just about that. It's interesting because it's double-edged. On one hand, Jews had a historic relationship with temple for several hundred years and more, where they actually went up and offered sacrifice to Jerusalem. And that is an intrinsic part of the way that Jews operate. It's in the way that we pray. It's in the way that we do our services, which in some way or other replicate the temple offerings that were. It's in the language of the tradition, and it's in the language of the rabbinic discussion around the tradition. This aspect of offering and temple and sacrifice and pilgrimage. And at the same time, the actual ways that Jerusalem physically is involved, it kind of has involvement in our lives, is limited, because there isn't temple sacrifice anymore, there isn't pilgrimage to Jerusalem anymore, and there isn't Jerusalem as the mechanic focal point of Jewish life, other than this remnant, which is prayer. So it's just interesting again, like place and no place. We continue to be a religion of place and no place.
Yeah, and just thank you. You're so right, Oliver. And I just wanted to refer to the crazy fact that the prophets, when they talk about the temple, they actually say, I mean, they criticize the people of Israel in real time, saying
You
that
have to translate it.
they are interested too much in, sacrificing and neglecting the human aspects of life, of helping people who need help and being a good person. And that's why, I'm proud to be Jewish. I'm proud to be Jewish among a lot of things about, this is one of them. The prophets are so, accurate in just saying what the problem is. And Why is it so amazing?
Yeah,
Because
Yair died like self-flagellation. If it's there, then you'll take it.
I think it's something very Jewish about it, and I think self-criticism is something. By the way, I think it's something very. I mean, I'm not religious, but I think religious people are supposed to be more more critical. I mean, in a way, I mean, because they have self-awareness more than people who are not religious supposed to. It's wonderful because for me, it feels so real nowadays. I mean, I can read Jeremiah, I can read Isaiah, and I can feel that they're talking to me. And it's 2026, and I live in Jerusalem. I mean, I speak Hebrew. Oh my God! In a way, it's light and it's heavy at the same time.
So another aspect of this dichotomy that we're trying to present, this scale that we're trying to present, I think is most accurately represented in Shabbat. And among the Kiddush that we say each week alludes to this core part that God creates the world in 6 days. On the seventh day, he rests. Al Kain Beirach Adonai et Yom HaShabbat v'kashehu. And so on the seventh day, you will bless that day, or God blesses that day and makes it holy. And dropped into this, conversation, there is a conversation about time also being holy, and a kind of differentiation, exactly as you said before, a differentiation from the physical world that we live in and even the physical place that we live in, into an elevation which prioritizes time above place. And the most beautiful poetry that's written about this, I think, is Abraham Joshua Heschel, and he writes a book called Sabbath, and he says, let's just read one small part. We must say farewell to manual work and learn to understand that the world has already been created. The world has already been created, and so will survive without the help of people. 6 days a week we wrestle profit from the world, wringing profit from the earth. On the Sabbath we especially care the seed of eternity planted in the soil. On the Sabbath we especially care for the seed of eternity planted in the soil. It's magic words, and takes us to a place where actually the place where we are doesn't matter, and takes us to a place where the sanctification of time becomes more significant and important. Time where we spend time in study, in reading the tradition, or maybe reading a book, or we spend time in family, or we spend time in relationship, or we spend time listening to the stories of our community in a slightly different way. These are moments where we, in the most cultural way, in terms of how we are raised and how many of our societies function, we're asked to take off, nurture the seed of the soul than the seed of what we can achieve and what we can wring from the place that we're in. I don't know how to create kind of civic connection or civic responsibility for place, because I can tell you, just as much as in Jerusalem, in the rest of Israel, and in the rest of the UK and much of Europe, people are not in the vein of taking care of their place and taking care of what's in front of them. But the aspect of spiritual care, I feel like, is even more foreign. That real resting possibility where we nurture ourselves and the ones around us in a really focused way, I think, is another aspect of what it is to be Jewish.
Interesting. Wanted to ask you whether you think that the fact that I'm a Jew living in Israel, in Jerusalem, and you are a Jew living in London, it makes us, generate a different attitude towards the place we live in because of our Jewishness. I have a feeling that the answer is actually yes. There is a different attitude. In a way. I have a feeling. I'm not sure, but I have a feeling, and I just wanted to react and say, obviously, Arthur Green also has a take on that. He has this very famous article, Sabbath as Temple. Like transforming all the aspects of what it means to work in the temple into the works that you're not allowed to do in Shabbat and sanctify time, when you don't have a place for God in the world. So I love this idea. What I don't like about it, when you take it too far and you say, listen, to be Jewish means to sanctify time and study and spiritual and neglect, and I talk from my Israeliness, right? And neglect your basic need, your basic human need to be in your place and to feel connected to it and to feel, without becoming a fascist, you can feel a natural feeling towards the place you live in because it shapes you, as I said before. So
It's an interesting dichotomy. Listen, I have a famous story living in Muswara, this place that I mentioned before, and it's pre-Pesach. One of the things that Jews do pre-Pesach is that they burn chametz. So you take all of the leavened articles out of your house, the food that's not kosher for Pesach, and you burn a little bit of it before Pesach as a kind of visual and demonstrative moment as you rid the house of the last bits of chametz, of unleavened bread or whatever it might be. And next to my house, like about 100 meters away, there's a big area with maybe like 25 to 30 bins, trash cans. And that morning before Pesach, the whole lot goes up in flames because
sure.
obviously it's, that kind of community of ultra religious Jews just doesn't have the kind of civic sense or, like, I don't know, even
Yeah.
just a sense that if you put a really big fire next to loads of plastic bins, that the whole lot's going to burn down. And lo and behold, the whole lot burnt down. But why do I say that? You can make the argument that there's corners of Jewish life where people are too concerned with the sanctity of time and not enough concerned with the sanctity of place. So they're too involved with the aspects of Shacharit Mincha Marav, of the three services of the day, or too involved with the mitzvah of Bitul Torah, that you shouldn't be, it's not exactly a mitzvah, but the minhag, that you should never waste any time. You should always be running towards the next mitzvah or the next segment of Torah study. And so in that aspect, you could say that there's aspects of religious life that are too much tied with time and not connected with place. But I can also say, like, in this country, part of the tragedy of the displacement of Jewish life here, which is not a complete displacement, but it is certainly a partial displacement and a real feeling of strain. I knew we were going to get back to antisemitism eventually, always, is a strain and a real pain in the heart of many Jewish people, that they feel that their place is not what it was here, certainly 3 or 4 years ago, and has degraded over time over the last 10 years. Part of that pain is that Jews do care about space. The number of people who have invested in political life in this country, in charities, in reading projects, in literature, in theatre, in medical services, in research, the cultural aspect of Jews arriving in a new country. The majority of Jewish people in this country today, in the UK, will have arrived in the last 100, I would say 90% in the last 150 years, including my including half my family. My dad's family is an exception to that. They've been here for about 300 years. That's a rare exception. But they have invested in place. They have taken place seriously. And that's part of the tragedy of the sense that Jews are somehow being pushed out at this moment because of the amount that people have invested. And I'm not talking money. I'm talking about blood, sweat, and tears that have enriched the UK and many, many parts of Europe.
One of the aspects that there is, it's a path from this main, very, you said it very clearly, and it actually moved me, Oliver, because really, it is a tragedy. And not to compare to what happened 80 years ago, but in Germany, but it's a sense. Just imagine, German Jews felt betrayed by their own homeland. It's very hard, and what it means for us in our conversation is that being Jewish doesn't mean that you don't have a real deep connection to the place. But one of the paths that stems from it is the feeling of marginality, I think. There is something, for me, maybe we'll we'll talk about it in the next episode. But for me, being Jewish is being part of the minority. I mean, I always prefer to live as a minority than as a part of the majority group. In Jerusalem, I live in Jerusalem, amongst other things, because of that, because I'm a secular in Jerusalem. Only 16% of Jews in Israel, 16, are secular. All the rest are religious or traditional or, ultra Orthodox. So I love it. I mean, there's something to it. And it's connected. I mean, there's something about being in the place, but not exactly in your place, that for me connects to my Jewishness.
I also wanted to say that I love that description. Listen, Yishai Leibowitz, I think, spoke about the tragedy of the possibility of Jewish majority in the land of Israel. I think I'm correct. Like the
Yeah.
kind of ultimate difficulty of nationalism, statehood, and the responsibility of statehood. And I think we find ourselves in that after 2,000 years, we never run anything other than a milk crate and a milk carton and trading routes, and maybe there were a couple of politicians in the mix over those 2,000 years for sure, but we never run a country until 1948, and lo and behold, it's been a bumpy journey. Let's just say the additional piece that I wanted to say was about no, I think this also plays into the tropes. I think in the UK right now, we have loads of different nationalities, and in Europe, we have loads of different cultural nationalities. One of the downfalls of the Jewish people that's being explicitly exploited right now is that we have a connection to nation. Connection to nation, whether it's nation as in our miyut, peoplehood in a global sense, that we're connected to all of the other Jewish communities around the world, including in Israel, or whether it's specific a tie to Israel. And I think, that could be true for any other country, but there is, especially in the context of Jewish community, there's this deep ties to the UK, politicians in government, people who run businesses, people who run big corporations, people who run, various stuff in and around the community, deeply embedded in British community. And yet those are also people who have connections to a sense of people that is external to the UK and this connection to Israel. And I think that is, from an outsider looking on, seemingly that's deeply destabilizing to have a sense that there are this people that lives in this country, but also have some kind of alternate national identity. And that's been a very complicated path, both in the last 3 years and historically for Jewish community. So in that sense, place is our greatest strength, but seemingly one of our greatest weaknesses.
Right,
Yeah,
right. I
we should
mean,
start to wrap up. So
the
maybe a couple of last words.
yeah, last word. I mean, the tension between place and time, in a way, when, as we put it, is on the one hand saying what you said about the really the challenge of British Jewry to, in the way the British treat the Jewish the British Jewry on the one hand, and the other, the challenge of being a sovereign in your country. At the same time, we can succeed not here and not here, and I feel we fail on both ends. So it's, I mean, for me as a Jew, I like it because something about my Jewishness is about tensions, is about bringing up tensions, that usually people don't like to feel or to treat. So I think that's one of the issues that I feel it again. Yeah.
The great news is that none of the tension is going away. I think we've started to unpick this theme of what matters most. I have a fervent national identity that we should belong and feel connected both to the land of Israel and to the people of Israel. In my imagination, that has to connect us. That has to tie us together. And then also I believe in our contribution to place, the actual place where we live. And on Shabbat and on the Chagim, on the festivals, we somehow suspend a piece of that and lean into a different type of holiness, which is non-spatial, which is not about place, which permits us to somehow elevate our relationships, our relationship with the world, elevate our relationship with the other, and ultimately elevate our relationship with God and Torah. We're going to carry on this conversation another day. I will offer a couple of thank yous to Sophia Kogan, who's our producer on Really Jewish,
תודה.
to Oy Vavoy for their musical intro and outro. You can listen to their single on Back to My Roots. We've got a Patreon page, which you're very welcome to make a small contribution to on a monthly basis to support the work of this podcast, and to Lech Techa, which is my weekly Tuesday night shiur, which often complements the words and work of this podcast. We're building this podcast from the wheels up. We're in our 11th week. Mazel tov, Yair. It's great to be carrying on with you. And we're delighted for you to have joined Really Jewish today. Share posts on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok from the Really Jewish podcast, and give us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. Thank you so much. See you guys next week. Thanks for listening to Really Jewish.